So the other day I mentioned Thomas Leonard, who was kind of an early, one of the early champions of coaching, and he was incredibly prolific, developing, great models that can be used in, or tools that can be used in coaching. And one of my favorites is this idea of what's called reserve, and it's basically reserve is kind of like having money in the bank. That would be having reserve in terms of money. And you can look at reserve in, many different areas of your life. You having reserve of energy. Um, it's like having a fully stocked fridge. Having reserve of time, like having enough time to do things, having enough free time, having enough emotional reserve. And having a level of reserve in terms of your relationships. Or Steve Covey talked about having an emotional bank account and sort of both people in a relationship investing enough that the relationship could handle some turbulence. And so I love this idea of reserve, and it's something that I try to keep in mind in the different areas of my life, making sure that there's a bit of reserve in the tank. And it's a lot like having a reserve gas tank if you drive. And I think it came to mind because recently I sort of came to the end of my reserve, and it's not often that I sort of get there. And what I experienced was almost like when your computer starts to hang up and you start to have sort of a system shutdown. Unfortunately, I just sort of hit the edge of my reserve in terms of like the energy that I had to bring things. Like I still had several meetings planned, and I just felt like I was going to completely sort of pass out and fall asleep. And the reason I bring it up is, not only is it important to have reserve, but it's good to have a bunch of different ways of knowing when you've used up your reserve. And what happened in my case was I had my kind of regular amount of meetings scheduled for the week, and then somebody that I work with had something come up, and so I had to take over a bunch of their meetings for the week. And so that all seemed fine, and it's always very positive to help someone out and all that. And so I was going through my week, and it was great. But what I wasn't sort of keeping track of is, oh, you know what? Because of this and my regular work, I didn't have as much time to recover, and so I'd get to the end of the day and be sort of spent, and then that seemed to add up for a couple of days in a row. And then I started experiencing my system shut down. And fortunately, I was in a call, and I mentioned it to a colleague, and fortunately we were able to reschedule that call, and I was able to lie down for a little while and recharge. But along with reserve, I think a good thing to keep in mind is what are your what are your sort of control indicators that you're getting close to the end of your reserve. That you're sort of, it's like you're driving and the gas tank says, oh, you need to fill up, and I'm sure most of us have had the experience of ignoring that light and thinking I can go a little bit further, and then finally you run out of gas. And that's sort of what happened to me. And I think in addition to having a reserve, setting those kind of warning lights really in advance of any issues can be a good thing. And so one thing is setting the alert early, and the other thing is actually listening to our internal alerts, or however you set up your alerts. Because it's one thing to have an alert go off, but if you ignore it, like that gas indicator, then you are going to run out of gas. which sort of defeats the whole purpose. And the other thing is, having a reserve is great, but what happened in this case is, somebody needed a hand, and I was like, oh yeah, sure, I've got some reserves, so I can take it on, and it was fine. And then the only problem is you forget at that moment that you don't have any additional reserves. So if something extra comes up in that moment, then you're, you sort of hit that system hang up, and it's time to reboot that. So yeah, I definitely recommend sort of setting up reserve in a lot of areas. And the idea with this is, part of the idea when Thomas Leonard talked about this is that, he felt that if you want to do well in business, or if you want to do well financially, the best place to do that is from a place of abundance, so to speak. So, the easiest way to make money is when you have some money. It's hard to make money. It's hard to attract business when you're sort of in scarcity. It's easy to get along with people when you've sort of put in the work and built the relationships and built the trust. And it's hard to maintain relationships when you've already tested, your patience and someone else's patience. It's hard to feel well emotionally if you haven't been paying attention to your sort of internal signals, and so I recommend having a high level of reserve in all these areas, and setting your tripwires, really making them very sensitive so they go off early, and you make a note and say, hey, I need to replenish there. And then thirdly, essentially paying attention to your tripwires when they are tripped, or when the indicator comes on and says, hey, you got to refill, then it's time to take it seriously and refill those. So I hope this can help you if you don't already do this, and fill your coffers and keep you in a place of general well-being where you can build even more. So enjoy that.